environmental class. Hey, welcome back. This is part 2 of your introduction or introductory lecture. Hopefully it's going to be a little less exciting this time because my other dog just left and there won't be as much barking, I hope, but you can still hear the cockatiel. So where did we leave off? I mean, we left off just talking about the basics. What is the environment? Who studies the environment and why it's so important? Not just to fulfill a requirement for your degree. It's very important that you all know a little something about how the environment works, right? Natural resources, whether they are renewable or non-renewable, and then a little bit about ecosystem capital. So for this week, we are going to go briefly over what sustainability, stewardship, and science mean as far as studying the environment. Some terms: anthropocentrism, biocentrism, and ecocentrism, and how it relates to ethics. And there are some acronyms too. They're called NIMT and NIM2 and NIMB, and how they relate to the environment. Now, a few things about the course. First of all, it can be somewhat of a downer. I hate to say this, but a lot of the topics that we approach when we talk about the environment, we talk about, kind of how these function normally, or how these things work in a normal basis. Like we talk about water resources, like where do we get our water? Where does it come from? How is it used? And then we talk about the problems, right? I mean, that's a common theme for all of our topics, is we talk about what's wrong, what are the challenges, what are humans doing to this? But then we wrap up with, well, what are the solutions and what are we doing about it? So it's a bit of a downer to hear about, oh my gosh, I mean, this is really terrible. This is really awful. I wish I'd never known that. But we like to end on a positive note, as far as, look, hey, let's not jump off the cliff yet. Here's what we're doing about it. There is hope if we all do our part. Now, another thing about this course is that there tend to be 3 common themes, underlying themes, I should say, when it comes to studying the environment. And it's not just this course, but an overall study of the environment, is the term sustainability. We will get to that, what that means to use our resources sustainably. And then stewardship, that's the second underlying theme of this course. And then science. You took a science class, and so that underlies all of our topics as well. Now, unlike other sciences, there are, I shouldn't say unlike all other sciences, but unlike most other sciences, there are ethics involved and politics involved as well, because with the environment comes forming policies to regulate the environment, to keep it safe, to keep it healthy, to keep it clean. And you don't really have that. We study biology, you learn about the cell, this and that, and you study ecology and we learn about turtles and how they fit in the pond, and study physics and how fast a ball drops if you drop it off a roof. You don't get into these political debates about that. But with the environment, sadly, unfortunately, that comes into play, right? And so we hit on that as well. So that's just an aside. You're going to see these themes all throughout the course. So, all right, so this first underlying theme is sustainability. So we strive to use resources in a sustainable way. So our resources are sustained from one generation to the next. So they last forever, or at least they're not used in a wasteful way, a careless way. They're used in a wise way. So they last at least as, like, for a non-renewable resource, it's used in a way that lasts as long as possible. I didn't even read the slide. Uses a natural resource to avoid its depletion in order to maintain an ecological balance. Yes, not just, it's awfully anthropocentric to say, sustainable use of a resource is so we as humans always have it. But many factors here when we talk about resources are for all the other living things on the planet as well as the proper functioning of ecosystems. And so therefore, that's why we have to maintain an ecological balance as well as for human use. This is a relatively new topic, and I'm saying in the last, 2020? I'm going to say 20, 30, 40, 50 years. It depends on the resource itself. But, this is new because it just seemed like we lived on this planet with not as that many people and with this like endless bounty of these resources, and also without the knowledge as far as the consequences of using resources up, whether it's an ecological issue or some sort of economic problem. And you see some examples here. What you see at the bottom of the slide is that's how forestry used to be practiced in this country. Is, well, you needed lots of wood for something, so you just chopped all the trees down. Gee, what could go wrong, right? I say that sarcastically. Use as many trees as possible because you needed them, and this made a lot of money for the timber industry. Now we're seeing this in other parts of the world today, unfortunately. Nowadays, we know that that's really bad practices for the environment. You wipe out a forest of its trees, and you wipe out almost all the other living things as well. And sure, someone made money really fast, but from an environmental standpoint, you're now face all sorts of issues with losing almost all the other living things that are there and increasing erosion. But then, we get to sometimes that doesn't resonate with people, but then when you start talking about how it affects people and how it affects the economy, then people stand up and take notice. So like you wipe out a forest and now you've increased the amount of erosion that takes place, like for instance, in any sort of like a weather event. That's why Haiti has such a problem when it comes to flooding after they get a hurricane. You'll see this in another lecture, but they share the same island as the Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic has pretty much kept its forests intact, whereas Haiti hasn't. They've clear cut almost all their forests. So when some sort of a hurricane hits that island with both countries on it, Haiti's the one that suffers because of all of the flooding, because they've wiped out all their trees that would prevent the erosion that takes place. And you also have to think, from an economic standpoint, if you're a timber company, you're going to go in and you're going to take all the trees. That's really awesome. But, what about 20 years from now, or 10 years from that point where you chop all the trees down? You can't just keep going from one forest to another until you wipe out all the trees. You saw the Lorax, maybe you didn't, because you eventually run out of money. So we have since learned to do these things in a sustainable way, and we'll investigate this later in the course as far as current forestry practices that are sustainable, selective cutting, or replanting trees. So from one generation to the next, they will always be there, and for economic purposes, for human purposes, but also to keep that forest ecosystem in and of itself healthy. We also have there's example after example after example of how we used to just use up resources without consequence. And now, seeing how that was unwise, we put sustainable practices into place. The cod fishery off the coast of New England and Canada, I mean, this sustained entire towns, this industry, everything from the people fishing to the restaurants to the canneries and the processing plants. And in the it seemed like the supply was endless, because if you see in that graph, just they were fishing at that point somewhat sustainably because of the methods that were used. They couldn't catch more than what could reproduce and replace the cod for the next season. Until the 1960s and mechanized commercial fishing practices were put into place, you can see how much that increased how many tons of fish were captured just in like you see in the middle of the 1960s, the spike of how many tons of fish were captured, and that made people rich for a very short time, actually, because you see that they were fishing unsustainably. They were catching more fish than what could then reproduce and replace itself. And that within a matter of 10, 20 years, not even 20 years, like 15 years, the cod fishery just collapsed. And you see that's in 1992, where there's no fish at all that they could catch. So they had to put laws into place to make sure that people no longer fished there. And there was no more commercial fishing that took place in those areas, actually off the Canadian. Oh, sorry, Benny. You okay? That's my dog barking. Not barking. I'm sorry. He has congestive heart failure, so he coughs a lot. Anyway, I'm sorry. And so these laws were put into place as far as the banning of fishing there. And then slowly laws started to say, well, you can fish a little bit there, but you can only take this many fish of a certain amount and of a certain size. But it still never came back to what it was by any stretch of the imagination. And the graph below it is even more concerning, because this covers like almost all commercial fisheries, as far as that if we don't start fishing in a sustainable way, using sustainable practices of fishing, that we're going to deplete like all of our commercial fish in 2048. Now, what is it, 2000? I mean, I'll still be around. I'll be in my late 70s, but you guys are still going to be pretty young. That's pretty harrowing. So regardless, what we do is we learn in this course about these practices put into place, whether it's agriculture or, water use, fisheries, forestry, on how it came about that we put into place sustainable practices, as far as making sure that these resources are sustainable, continue from one generation to the next. Now, another theme is stewardship. Stewardship is the responsibility to take care of the environment, to practice sustainability. These are the actions that one person or many people or corporations or companies or nations can take as far as practicing sustainability. The responsibility, the ethics, the morality behind putting these practices into place. Now, there's examples of forced stewardship. For instance, as far as the law is concerned, you may have recycling laws. If you do not recycle, you could get fined. If you use too much water in certain parts of the world, you could get fined. And so these are laws put into place where you're forced to practice stewardship. This doesn't always sit well. Especially in our country, as you're well aware, we have this kind of rugged individualism going on in our country, for better or for worse. And so some people don't like being told what to do. And so forced stewardship sometimes does not go over well. And that is a challenge that we will see throughout the course. Then there's the voluntary stewardship, and this can be from like a nation standpoint or a company, corporation, a neighborhood, but a lot of this is like on the individual. Um, for instance, we don't, as of yet, we don't have a plastic bag ban here, but when you go grocery shopping, you may choose to take your own bags. You may, as instead of using plastic, you may choose to, we still sell water in bottles, but you may choose the more sustainable method of having your own water bottle, having your own coffee mug. If you get coffee someplace and you use your own mug, you can ride your bike places instead of using your car, because that contributes to the sustainable use of fossil fuels. Or you even may go a step further and you may have an electric car, or choose renewable energy, or have solar panels on your house. So these are forms of stewardship, individual voluntary stewardship. And sometimes these can be um, lifestyle changes. It depends. Some people are more committed or hardcore than others about this. Uh, Sometimes there's a little bit of controversy about this, because sometimes people will say that some forms of stewardship are a privilege or a luxury. Like, someone will say, well, I would love to have a Tesla, but I can't afford a Tesla. Don't go hating on me because I have a car that uses gasoline. Where am I supposed to get the money for that? Or I would love solar panels on my house, but I can't afford, solar panels. Or you can even go as far as I like sustainable. There's, which you'll see in the film. I think it's next week, or I think it's this week, as far as choosing sustainable seafood that was sustainably caught instead of commercially caught by other methods. It's more expensive, and someone might say, I have a very tight budget. I can't afford to pay an additional $2 for something that was caught sustainably. Now, there are many stewardship initiatives which don't involve any sort of cost to the individual, like cleaning up litter, for example. Um, some people, sometimes they think, well, what is just one person going to do? So I may choose to, only go to thrift stores instead of going to get new clothing, reusing old clothing. Um, but this is something that collectively everybody can make a difference. They say if everybody, and this is kind of a similar example, but if everyone does one kind deed towards somebody else once a day, what a difference the world would make, right? Because it's a collective, everybody does it. If and you see that's an Onion headline from the satirical website, The Onion. How bad for the environment can throwing away one plastic bottle be, say 30 million people, kind of a thing. If all of us throw out our plastic bottles, um, that's pretty bad. But let's just say, one person says, what's the difference if I just throw out this plastic bottle and not put it in recycling? Who cares? Well, if we all did that, then that would be a problem. The more people that contribute, the better. And again, in our country, we have this kind of individualist uh, kind of attitude where, you say the word, if we collectively do it, people get too politically charged about that term as far as people working together for a common good. But again, that is something that we do address throughout the course. So sustainability, and then stewardship. And of course, science. It's a science course. So you're learning how science works. Studying the environment involves, at least for this course, involves science. And we I'm just going to read it here. I always hate that. But employs the rigor of the scientific method to provide information needed to human societies to improve human welfare and to improve the health of those natural systems that sustain those societies. Now, I say sound science. Science, unfortunately, just by nature, as I mentioned in the last lecture, that science is always on the cusp of not knowing. That's why we do research, because we want to know things. And it's also, we revisit scientific problems, or we may approach a scientific problem differently and collect data that may disprove what the data showed before. And so sometimes people cast a doubt on science because of this. This is just the nature of science. It's how science works. I know with Anthony Fauci, Dr. Anthony Fauci, with, first saying, don't wear a mask, then wear a mask. And some people were saying, well, he doesn't even know what he's talking about because he said one thing and then he said another thing. It's like, well, that's because given the data at the time, those were the conclusions that were drawn. And once the data improved, then different conclusions were drawn. But I think the big thing going on here with environmental, studying the environment, is that because laws are made and legislation takes place in order for laws to be made and then enforced, and sometimes making those laws and enforcing those laws can might impinge on someone's personal rights, or where they can build a building or affect their business practices, that the science has to be free from politics, from someone's religious agenda, from someone's political agenda, or personal agenda, because sometimes science gets hijacked or corrupted, or what we say cherry picked, or sometimes science actually gets misrepresented, like cherry picked, in the way that they'll only pick out what fulfills their personal agenda to make money, for instance, and they'll leave other parts of the data out just so it fits their narrative. And it's extremely, extremely unfortunate. And we see this in some fields more than others. Well, the environment, for sure, evolution, for sure. And a lot of times you just have to follow politics and follow follow the money. And we do see some examples here. It says, we don't even know that stem cell research will provide cures for anything, much less that it's very close to yielding major advances. It's like, okay, it's great that you feel that. If somebody feels that way, that's whatever. They can say the sky is green with purple polka dots too. But this was said by someone of great influence, and that was, at the time, it was Nancy Reagan, who was President Ronald Reagan's wife. She actually changed her mind on this when Ronald Reagan was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and needed stem cell research, the findings from stem cell research, in order to help cure or mitigate his Alzheimer's. And then she was praising it. So for the whole country, it was bad. But when it served her personally, then she was all for it. We see that time and time again. Another one. There is no hole in our ozone layer. What environmental wackos really want to do is attack our way of life in the effort to limit chlorofluorocarbons, which is a chemical made in refrigerants. Their enemy is capitalism. So it basically says environmental wackos made up that there's a hole in the ozone layer because they're against capitalism. It's like, okay, well, these NASA pictures that you see up there, that big black spot is a hole in the ozone layer. So despite the fact that NASA satellites showed the hole in the ozone layer, this person of great influence convinced millions of people that there isn't one. and that in the environmental scientists' conclusions were based on that environmental scientists hated capitalism and were just trying to destroy it. That was Rush Limbaugh, and you may know him as a television or a TV host with millions of followers, beginning in I think in the mid '80s, maybe. And people still believe him to this day about the environment. You have Lamar Smith, 600,000 more than he received the most from the fossil fuel industry, and it was the chairman of the House Science Committee. So this guy had a lot of influence, obviously. Said man-made global warming is a conspiracy to destroy America. Or no, yeah. Oh wait, no, that was $600,000. That Lamar Smith received $600,000 from the fossil fuel industry, more than any other industry. There's someone who's deciding about global climate change. It's Lamar Smith, who I think same guy. I'm sorry, I'm getting mixed up here. Say global warming is a conspiracy perpetuated by certain members of the scientific community to destroy America. These views are at odds with the scientific community. Really? Are they? I'm guessing there might be one or two, but it's like, okay, so he feels that way. That's awesome, but he's a chairman of the House Science Committee, for crying out loud. Unbelievable. The debate about evolution is heated and thriving, and alternatives should be part of the science curriculum. Evolution, the Big Bang, and embryology are lies from the fire pit of hell. This is someone else who is in the U.S. Congress. We have a state representative, John Shimkus, who said that the planet won't be destroyed by global warming because God promised Noah in the Bible that the earth would never be destroyed. Okay, so, I'm not knocking religion. That's great that he feels that way. That must be very comforting to him. But, this guy was in charge of making policies to try to combat global climate change, and he wouldn't do it because he's basing his thoughts and ideas and his voting not based on data from environmental scientists, but on a religious text. And this is just, unfortunately, this is part of what environmental science deal with day in and day out. We'll do this in lab. Skip that. But anyway, also involved in the environment, which you're not going to find, for instance, if you're studying physics or if you're studying a lot of other scientific endeavors, like math too, is that there are ethics involved in in environmental science. Environmental ethics are the ethics applied to environmental decisions. When you're using ethics, what is right or wrong depends on how you were raised, what culture you are in, the values you hold, the worldview you hold, but in relation to the environment. And ethics come into play when it comes to forming policy, because there are some who feel, again, their emotions, they feel that something is important over something else. And sometimes what you'll see is this NIMBY and NIM2 ideology. This NIMBY is the acronym, not in my backyard. Some people are very much, ethically, overall, they're very much for environmental initiatives. Like the example here, the waste to energy plants, where they take garbage, municipal solid waste, and they burn it, and they're able to clean up most of the effluents, so you don't have much air pollution, and create energy out of this. And they think that's a great idea, but they'll say, well, not in my backyard. I don't want that in my backyard. No way. Another example of this is the Kennedy family off the coast of New England. They're as liberal as can be, and they're all for renewable energy, but they fought very hard to have wind turbines that were planned to be constructed off of the coast of where they lived because you could see them and you could barely see them. You kind of even needed binoculars, but it ruined their view from their compound, so they fought against it. No, not in my backyard. This is a great initiative, but not in my backyard. Now, NIM2 is similar, but it's for politicians as far as not in my term of office. And this goes to initiatives obviously beyond the environment, but like examples they might be like from a personal standpoint, they might agree like, hey, renewable energy, well, it's the wave of the future. It create jobs, but if they're representing constituents that they have to please, that they need to, you know, have them vote for them to keep their jobs, they might kick it down the road and not vote the way that is ethically right, because they want to keep their jobs. A somewhat related note, like we've been needing funding for infrastructure for decades, our crumbling highways and bridges, but it's a huge undertaking financially that's going to, raise taxes for many of us. So a lot of politicians they just keep kicking it down the road because once you raise taxes, that's like a death knell for any politician as far as getting the ability to get elected, that following year. And, it can be personal too. We can use examples like, how do you feel when you see somebody littering in a public place? That irritates the crap out of me. You might not care. Some people just, what do they might not care. But what if somebody litters, but they do it on your lawn? It's a little different because it's kind of, gets a little bit more personal. But what if they do it on their own lawn? Now we have rules and laws that might protect them from doing this. How do you feel about people who do not recycle glass, metal, plastics, or paper, etc.? We find that sometimes you have to just convince people that like recycling is ethically the right thing to do. I hate to use this phrase, but shame them into it. In a way, like when I was a kid in the 70s, like really nobody recycled. Maybe some of the hippies did, but making fun, of course, being so very self-deprecating, because I consider myself that. But if you wanted to recycle, you'd have to go someplace, drive your glass or cans pretty far away to find a place that would do that. And now, like you growing up had all sorts of recycling initiatives. You were taught as a little kid that this is what you do. And then we slowly but surely, made recycling much more easier. Here on campus, I know we put recycling bins in every room, and we also have commingled recycling. You don't have to separate your paper and your plastic and your cans like you used to have to do. You just put it all in one. And then recycling rates go up. And sometimes people will kind of feel like bad if they put something in a recycling, or they don't put something in a recycling bin. Some people don't care, but we make it part of our ethical mindset, from a cultural standpoint. And different ways of looking at ethics, specifically in the environment. It's a really great graphic. We have anthropocentrism, biocentrism, and ecocentrism. An anthropocentric viewpoint when it comes to the environment is pretty much me first, me second, and whatever is left over, me third. It's only people that have rights. As far as cost-benefit analysis, it's only important if it benefits people from an economic standpoint. And that's the only thing considered, is the economic benefit for people. And if it doesn't provide benefit for people, economically or otherwise, then it has no value. It's worthless. It's not worth doing. Wipe out a forest, we're going to make a lot of money doing that. If it benefits people, awesome. But who cares about everything else? Biocentrism, this is where you expand the circle to include, all right, so it's not just people, but it's just all living things. Human and non-human have ethical standings. And if it's something that destroys living things, if they oppose an initiative, even if it creates jobs, if it destroys, living things. So you're taking more into consideration. Whereas an ecocentrism is an overall holistic view that everything has value. All ecosystems have value. Values the well-being of species, community, ecosystems, preserves connections between entities. So an ecocentrist standpoint would take into account entire ecosystems and weigh that against, do a benefits, cost benefits analysis. So we go through all of these throughout the course. You're going to see these themes visited over and over again: sustainability, stewardship, and sound science. And then we'll also touch on ethics throughout the course. How do you feel? What does that mean from the standpoint of the environment and what is done? All right, well, that is it for now. And hope you all are well, and we'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.